draw us closer to God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. We're getting ready for another COVID Christmas. And I don't know about all of you, but it's a struggle. It's not going to be everything that it was. And it's a hard year. Take COVID away entirely, and it has been a hard year for this congregation. I mean, I look out across your faces and I imagine, have we got faces downstairs? Other than the children? Two downstairs. And so many of our families have been touched this year and have lost a loved one, which really adds to the pain of not all being able to get together in the ways that we are used to. Nevertheless, my mind is drawn perhaps to memories of Christmas past, hopes of Christmas future, and maybe a little bit of what we'll see this Christmas too. Is it at Christmas time is different? You ever notice that Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day don't feel like they have a day of the week? You have to kind of figure out, well, what day is that? I don't even know. That somewhere around the 28th or 29th, you start to pick up on days of the week again? Maybe it's just me. Our sense of time is off. To me, I also remember Christmases, especially Christmases in those really important formative years in my late teens and early 20s, as a time of difference. A time when we get together with different people than we usually see every day. Perhaps without the COVID anxiety even saying that is giving to me. So for example, as a young adult, just going to university, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to go to a licensed premises with my friends. But when I'm at home at Christmas, me and my brothers go out and play trivia at the pub. And it's like, this is different. I'm not used to going out like that with them. Oftentimes, you sit around and drink coffee with your friends. But perhaps you are at a Christmas gathering, your child's or grandchild's Christmas gathering, and you look around and you realize that the only other person in the room that has no idea about whatever the technobabble is that those kids are talking about is the other grandma from the other side of the family that you haven't seen since a birthday party, yet you end up talking to her. Do you get what I mean? You see different people at Christmas. You connect to different people in different ways than the rest of the time. And one of the things that sometimes happens in some families is that sometimes things go on a bit of a gender divide. I'm not going to say this is a good thing or a bad thing. It's really good when we break off into different groups of different interests. Everyone who loves playing board games can go and play board games, and everyone who wants to watch the game can go and watch the junior hockey game. And, you come together in odd combinations. In my family, if you get me and Jen and my sister, and in years past my mother together, and we are sitting around at Christmas time, there is knitting needles or crochet hooks in everybody's hands. Some of you may have also encountered the sort of space where women are creating crafts. Typically, lots of life exists outside the gender binary, but people who sit around doing scrapbooking or quilting or anything like that, and they're talking. Now, I have not had the privilege to be in men's spaces, so when you're out tinkering in the shed and fixing the fences and doing whatever it is that you do, whether these conversations happen. But in these women's spaces, it could be called the Women's Knitting Guild and Revolutionary Society. You get a bunch of people together and they start talking, and before you know it, they start talking about how to make the world better, about the problems in the world and how we would fix them. But there can be a prophetic imagination that's happening in those spaces. Mary, in this story, is an incredibly strong and, I would say, rebellious woman. She is not, we don't know how old she is. Some people have portrayed her as being a prepubescent girl who just submits herself entirely to God. And for the spirituality of prepubescent girls, in a spiritual sense, that's great. But it's also had some really negative consequences for some girls in terms of how they're being taught to think about themselves. But the Mary in this story is different. So in the world of the Bible, and I'm not just talking about small town Nazareth, I'm talking about the Roman Empire, there had recently been quite a big legal switch in marriage. There was big debates in marriage. Everyone was arguing about family values in marriage and trying to figure out how they should do things. The question they were debating was whether women belonged to their fathers or their husbands after they got married. So that feels yicky for us. We're like, well, women, they belong to themselves before and after they're married. And we might symbolically give a bride away, but we really know that she's making her own choice here. But in the biblical world, that was the debate. So you keep that in mind, that Mary isn't her own legal agent. Nevertheless, she acts as her own agent. She shows independence, and she consents. It's one of the biggest parts of this story that I don't think that we have talked about a lot in the past, that perhaps we should. So the angel comes and talks to her and calls her favored one. And her response is to be perplexed. Like, why are you talking to me? Why choose me? Of all the girls in Nazareth, why me? I say girls in Nazareth, all the women in Nazareth. You know, perhaps Mary was older and she and Joseph had postponed getting married for who knows what reason, including the fact perhaps that Mary doesn't seem to understand the rules that the men are in charge. And so she may not think of herself as favored. And she's trying to figure out what this angel is about. Like, why are you talking to me like this? And the angel says, what do angels always say in the Bible? What's the first thing they always say? Don't be afraid. That's the angel's first message all over the place. Don't be afraid. I'm going to ask you again, what's the angel's message all the time? Don't be afraid. For you found favor with God, and now you'll conceive in your womb. I don't know why we use the word womb. We never use the word womb except in religious settings, I've noticed. A new translation's got to come out. It's got to say the word uterus. Or to be more correct, of course, knowing that we have an understanding that is more technical and complete, the answer should almost say, you will conceive in your fallopian tubes. Does that sound weird? Is that not what the angel's supposed to say? That's not churchy enough. That you will conceive. God is going to come upon you with great power, and then you are going to conceive, and you'll bear a son and name him Jesus. And then the angel gives her a bit of a tip to help her along the way, maybe. Think about your relative, Elizabeth. And Mary does. And Mary, I said it before, Mary consents. Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. And then Mary heads off to her relative's place. We don't know whether she's terrified or excited or just wants to be with her relative and support her through her the last trimester of her pregnancy. But she goes and into the house of the priest Zechariah, who has been struck with, say, aphasia, that's not the right word, the inability to speak. What's that called? Anyone? I want to say aphasia, but I don't think that's quite right. You know what I mean. He can't speak. And Mary comes here, and Elizabeth is the model of youth ministry in the main textbook that's given to people who are studying to be youth ministers in at least the mainline denominations, if not more. The book is called The God-Bearing Life. And Elizabeth is held up as the kind of youth minister every youth minister should be. Because Elizabeth sees Mary's spirituality and praises it and creates a space in her home where Mary can proclaim the Magnificat. And the Magnificat is, I believe it's the first prophetic words in the Gospel of Luke. It is an introduction and a summary of what the ministry of Jesus is going to be about. And Mary says these, I called my sermon, What Mary Did Know. And she doesn't talk about Jesus' miracles in this story. It's not that Mary foresees that Jesus is going to have some really cool parlor tricks. Mary foresees that Jesus is going to change the world by toppling leaders. Like, you get a bunch of women together, they start talking, and before you know it, they're going to overthrow kings. And these women, now if you imagine a group of feminine identified people sitting around in a circle doing their crafts in a blue state or in a blue household in the United States, you know what I mean, I'm sure, when I associate a color with a household in the United States, in the January of 2017, and they talk about overthrowing tyrants from their thrones. You know who they're talking about, right? In this story, it's the same thing. Luke has already set it up. He's told us who the tyrants are right at the beginning of his Gospels. The first thing he says is that Jesus was born, and this is what was happening. He makes that very clear, who the tyrants are. And God is going to come in and turn the world upside down. So when you, over the holiday seasons, are connecting with across the generations in your life, don't underestimate the power and strength that you have and that you bring to those grandchildren or great nieces and nephews or anybody. But especially as people are going through difficult times in their life and they get a chance to connect to an adult maybe who isn't their parent, but who is part of their family, so they sort of get it, what the family is like. And you can help them reframe. There's little moments that stand out. Those moments when an aunt says something to you about your parents and you understand them in a new way all of a sudden. When you can't figure out how to take a next step of something in your life and your parents are too invested. Sometimes you have a conversation with grandma who's got more perspective. So you have holy work to do if you have this opportunity in any way, shape, or form to connect unusually, to be like Elizabeth, the relative who's a step removed. Because not only are you called to your ministry, but you're called to support them in their ministry. And don't for 1 second think that that necessarily means that they need to come on a Sunday morning and sit in a room like this. When they figure out what the strength that they have, the gifts that God has given them, or the gifts that you have given them through genetics and upbringing, or however you want to think about it, what is in them meets the brokenness of the world and the way that they can help make it better. They're doing God's work. It doesn't have to be baptized. God is already there doing it. And you can help them see that. Help them see how they are becoming the best version of themselves. That is love. That is connection and meaning and hope. May God bless us in this season of Christmas with opportunities to connect with those who understand us in a different way and who can show us anew where God is in our lives. Thanks be to God. Amen.